Well, okay then. This is Real Sean Irish coming at you from Atlanta. Now that I've got your appetite whetted a little bit with the conversation, hip hop or slam, let's take a closer look at that. What came first? Um, okay, let's just assume for a second the hip hop came first. Okay, so late 70s at the extreme earliest, but the 80s? I don't think so. Slam poetry, okay, slam poetry, poesis, okay, poetry. That's talking about going back through all human cultures since the spoken word, okay. Let's just say that the early forms of poetry are probably more like slam than we know. We don't have any real examples. There weren't any recordings made, but to the best of our abilities by these oral traditions and the way they were handed down, we could say that slam and these higher forms of poetry are literally, this is the way our ancestors encoded information and passed it down to us prior to writing, prior to having any way of keeping writing from generation to generation, say clay tablets or scrolls or printing, and then the internet. For those of you that think that the internet invented all things, it's the newcomer. It's the one that's the most fragile. It's the one that is the most volatile on all of those, because we have clay tablets going back to many, many centuries, in fact, thousands of years. We have cuneiform in clay tablets, from quite early BC. We have papyrus scrolls from the Egyptian times. We have leather scrolls from other cultures dating back to around the time of Christ, or maybe earlier, maybe give or take. That's thousands of years. The internet's been around 40, 50 years? I don't know, maybe 50 years. Let's say 50 years in its infant form, and about 15 to 20 years in its latest form. So that would be like equating hip-hop as the progenitor of slam poetry would be sort of like saying the internet invented the spoken word, and it's just not true. It's not even close. It's absolutely turning history on its head. Nothing against hip-hop. I'm just saying, let's look at the origins. Excuse me. So now, let's just say slam came first. Slam in the general sense of poetry. That doesn't make it bigger or better or anything else, but slam came first, slam poetry. Slam is a style of poetry. I'm not going to sit here and give you an example of my work, because I'm not what I would consider to be a slam poet. I'm not even a good example of a mediocre slam poet. There are plenty of great slam poets out there. You can take a look at a Saul Williams on the international side, or maybe here in Atlanta, a Teresa Davis or somebody like that. We've got just incredible slam poets here in Atlanta. It's like New York or San Francisco or anywhere else you want to go in the world in terms of slam poetry. In fact, Atlanta hosted the World Slams just a few years ago. I think it was 2011 or 2012. I can't remember. But just recently, yeah, we hosted the World Slam event here in Atlanta, little bitty Atlanta, in Decatur, of all places. So yeah, I mean, we've got some great slam poets here. And so if it came down to it, slam is a totality. You can have somebody playing a little bongo or conga in the background. You can have somebody doing a little toot, 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 on a keyboard or something like that. But for the most part, in a competition, you can't do that. Real slam is about human voice. It's about your ability to communicate. There are team slams, one or more persons, and then there are individual slams. And the individual slams are, I would say, almost always the most impressive because of what one individual can do with simply their words and their tone and their cadence and their voice and the ideas they put forth. So is there any comparison of slam poetry to hip-hop, let's say? I would say, yeah, there is. There's a definite and direct comparison, I would say. I would, again, turn the popular wisdom on its head and say that, no, hip-hop did not invent slam. Slam invented hip-hop. More likely than not, slam and slam poetry in the early forms of slam in this latest, whatever, iteration of poetry is what invented hip-hop. And then hip-hop, I said, invented itself into multiple genres, and then it's gotten funneled back into this very narrow range, which I call weaponized media, because it is. It's essentially, it's a gangster rap, and it's entrainment of the human mind, and it's pretty negative. So if you took the average, let's say the average superstar from hip-hop, and set them on a stage, side by side, with, let's say a solid, maybe not even world-class like Saul Williams, let's just say a solid slam poet, and they both had one piece to do, And let's assume that the hip-hop superstar had to do a piece nobody had ever heard before. And it had to be original, had to be their own. And same with the slam poet. In an unbiased audience, I know who would win almost every single time. Now that's unless the hip-hop artist came out of that very narrow, almost lack of dynamic range that they use in performance and actually did what they know how to do, which means they stopped playing the monkey, stopped playing the organ grinder's monkey, and stopped playing the fool, and they'd become an artist again. In which case you'd have a real slam meet, you'd have a real event. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Not trying to slam anybody, not to, to coin a word. I'm also not trying to diss hip-hop for its narrow range and extremely narrow range of thought and ideas as currently, let's say as currently marketed, because I know hip-hop is much bigger than what is currently being marketed, mass marketed. I know it's much bigger because I've been following slam for more than a decade, probably a decade and a half now. And slam invented hip-hop. So if you put these two artists side by side, and the hip-hop artists just try to do their regular hip-hop thing without the band, without all the stuff, and it's a new piece of whatever that nobody's ever heard before, and same for the slam artist. The slam artist is going to kick hip-hop right out of the arena. I don't care if it's a local slam artist, if they're any good, because they're about a totality of experience. They're about the ideas. They're about art. They're about communicating in a very complex, often a very complex set of ideas in a very complex string of words. There's nothing simple about it. If you've ever tried it, I've been a poet since I was probably 7 years old, and like I said, I suck at hip-hop or slam, but I really suck at slam. I can do versions of slam-type poetry if I'm reading other people's poems, and like if I'm reading a known piece, which I've done before in performance, but not as my own work, but as reading somebody else's work. And that works for me, but me reading my own stuff, I'm not a slam poet, by definition, I would suppose, or by my nature. So let's just say then, now that I've whet your appetite, how many slam poets out there are filling arenas, filling these big arenas and touring around with 11 semi-trucks full of props and accoutrement and lights and gear and sound and all this and subwoofers and all that stuff. You know of any? None. Some of them, I think Saul Williams toured with 9 Inch Nails or somebody a little while back, and he's done tours. And if you've ever seen him perform, I would put up anything. I would put up like Saul Williams' least performance piece up against the absolute best in the hip-hop world on a side-by-side comparison on stage. And so I'm just saying, hip-hop, as is currently practiced and marketed, is the absolute infant of the form, and it's acting sort of like the absolute infant of the form, and I really wish it would grow up and flower and expand back out into what it was prior to 1992, where there was a whole range of expression going on and not just this me, bling, bling, bling kind of stuff that's been going on since. Which, like I said, is all fine and dandy, but when you narrow the entire range of music down to that, it's as if there was one little teeny tiny speck of country music that everybody focused on, and the rest of country music didn't exist. Or one little teeny tiny speck of gospel, and the entire rest of gospel and Christian music didn't exist. Or one little teeny tiny speck of, let me give you an example from classical music, is that there's a vein of classical music where they had these little tiny, I call them mosquito violins that is squeaky, squeaky, and it's just like, pardon me, it fucking grates on my nerves. I like classical music in general, in background. I like it in the background when I'm working on stuff. I don't really listen to classical music per se. I love it when I'm working. But the squeaky violins, man, just, I'll destroy the speaker. I can't listen to that shit. It's awful. I can't handle it. But it's like, it's as if all of classical music got condensed down to the composers who did the squeaky violins. It's awful. I mean, come on, it's like, if there's a whole range of things, yeah, I can put up with a squeaky violin song. I'm fine with that. If there's an entire range. But if everything's squeaky violins, man, I'm going to shut it off and find something else. That's just a classical music example for me, because I listen to a lot of different types of music over the years and in my lifetime. And I listen to music, I don't know the pop stuff, but I can always recommend some things you have never heard and some bands you've never heard of, and you should have heard of them, but you haven't. So that's kind of where I'm at. So there you go. Slam versus hip-hop. It's not really a versus. I think slam is the parent of hip-hop, and slam should be proud. I mean, hip-hop is a very commercially successful genre. I just wish it would grow up and flower again, because it's been constricted into a very narrow range. needs to come out of that range so it can grow up and mature and become vital again, because it's becoming a really, it's like the monkey in the organ grinder. If you're on stage and you can't compete with a slam artist who might be standing right across from you, what's your problem? Where's your art? What you got?